The derelict research vessel hung in space like a corpse, its hull pockmarked with micrometeorite impacts and the telltale scorch marks of plasma fire. Lieutenant David Torres checked his oxygen reserves for the third time in as many minutes, a nervous habit he'd picked up after the incident on Titan, and pushed off from his dropship's airlock into the silent void. His boots magnetized to the outer hull with a satisfying thunk that he felt more than heard. The Kepler 442 station floated in the distance, its ring structure still glowing with emergency lighting, a reminder that the skirmish here had ended only 6 hours ago. Someone had to check the debris field for survivors, intelligence, anything salvageable. That someone, apparently, was him. "Torres, you reading me?" Lieutenant Sarah Kim's voice crackled through his helmet comm, distorted by the interference from the nearby nebula. Loud and clear, well, loud and staticky, about to breach the starboard airlock. "Remember, 15-minute sweeps per sector. Command wants you back before the Calithians decide to return for their toys." David activated his cutting torch, the blue flame eerily beautiful against the black. "If they left any toys worth returning for, I'll be sure to gift-wrap them." He paused, then added, "Think they'd appreciate a bow? I'm feeling festive." Sarah's laugh was warm even through the static. "Just don't get dead, Torres. Paperwork's a nightmare." The airlock yielded after 2 minutes of careful cutting. David cycled through into darkness, his helmet lamp cutting a cone of white through the dust particles that floated like snow in zero gravity. Emergency lighting flickered somewhere deeper in the ship, casting everything in an intermittent red glow that made his heart rate tick upward despite himself. The research vessel was old, pre-war construction, back when humans and Calithians still pretended they might coexist peacefully in the outer colonies. The corridors were wider than modern military-efficient designs, with viewports every 20 meters that now showed nothing but stars, and the occasional piece of debris drifting past. David's mag boots clicked rhythmically as he moved through the abandoned halls, his rifle sweeping corners more from training than any real expectation of contact. Sector by sector, he found nothing. Empty labs with floating data tablets. A mess hall where someone's last meal still clung to a plate in zero-G suspension, the food freeze-dried by vacuum exposure. A crew quarters where family photos drifted like rectangular ghosts. The ship told the story of a rapid evacuation, people fleeing with whatever they could grab. He was beginning to think the whole sweep was a waste of time when he reached the observation deck. The chamber opened before him like a cathedral to the cosmos. 3 walls of reinforced glass, still intact, miraculously, looked out onto a vista that would have stolen his breath if the decompression hadn't already done that. The Horsehead Nebula dominated the view, its russet clouds backlit by newborn stars, so close he felt he could reach through the glass and touch the swirling cosmic dust. David almost missed her. She sat in the far corner, pressed against where the glass met the bulkhead, her form barely distinguishable from the shadows. Only the faint reflection of starlight on her armor plating gave her away. He brought his rifle up instinctively, combat protocols flooding his nervous system with adrenaline. Then he saw her ears. They rose from her head in elegant points, longer than any human's, catching the nebula's light like polished obsidian. Calithian. He could see the ceremonial markings on her armor even from here, the kind only their elite warriors wore. His HUD was already running facial recognition, pulling data from every intelligence database the Terran Defense Corps had access to. But she wasn't moving, wasn't reaching for a weapon, wasn't doing anything except sitting there, her shoulders shaking in a rhythm David recognized from his sister after their father died. She was crying. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. This warrior, this enemy soldier, sat weeping in the starlight like a child who'd lost her way home. Her legendary energy blade, he could see it now, lay in pieces beside her, the crystalline core shattered, its fragments catching the red emergency lights in tiny sparkles of broken technology. David's tactical display flashed urgent red. Commander Sira Voltanis, the Phantom of Arcturus. Kill count, classified, threat level, extreme. Recommended action, immediate termination or capture. The woman who'd held the Procyon Gap for 3 days against an entire battle group. The specter in every briefing. The nightmare in every pilot's final moments. And she was crying. David stood frozen, his rifle trained on her but his finger slack on the trigger guard. Protocol said call it in. Protocol said take the shot. Protocol said this was the intelligence coup of the decade, maybe the war. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. A person's worst moment tells you more about them than their best, Mijo. Watch how they fall before you judge how they stand. He lowered his rifle slowly, the movement causing a slight sound as his armor creaked. Her elongated ears twitched, flattening against her skull in a motion he'd only seen in intelligence footage, usually right before she killed someone. She looked up, and even in the dim light, he could see her eyes were red and swollen. They stared at each other across the observation deck, framed by the infinite cosmos, 2 soldiers caught in a moment that felt suspended outside of time itself. The war existed out there in the black, in the stations and colonies and contested zones. But here, in this glass cathedral of stars, there was only silence and the sight of the galaxy's most feared warrior looking utterly, devastatingly human. David's mouth felt dry. His training warred with something deeper, something that looked at another person in pain and couldn't just see an enemy designation. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft enough that he hoped it wouldn't spook her. "Are you injured?" She flinched at the sound of his voice, her whole body going rigid in a way that made David's hand twitch toward his rifle despite himself. Her ears remained flat against her skull, and he found himself cataloging the reaction, fear response. His training whispered, rare in Calithian combat personnel, almost never observed in the field. "I asked if you're injured," he repeated, taking a half step back to give her space, to show he wasn't advancing. His rifle hung loose at his side now, pointed at the deck rather than her center mass. Sira Voltanis. Because it was definitely her, his HUD had triple confirmed it with the kind of certainty usually reserved for stellar navigation. Turned her face back toward the glass, toward the nebula beyond. When she spoke, her voice came out rough and strained like someone who'd been crying for hours. "No, not the way you mean." The answer hung in the recycled air between them. David found himself at a complete loss, his training manual somehow having failed to include a section on what to do when you find a legendary enemy warrior having an emotional breakdown. He shifted his weight, his mag boots clicking against the deck, and tried to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do next. "So," he started, then stopped, started again. "This is awkward." Her head turned slightly, just enough that he could see her profile, the elegant line of her elongated ear catching starlight. There was something almost comical about the confusion on her face, tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. "Awkward? Yeah, I've seen your picture on every threat assessment briefing for the last 2 years. You're basically the boogeyman we tell new recruits about. Don't go into contested space or the Phantom will get you." He was babbling now, nerves making his mouth run without consulting his brain. "And now you're just here, crying, which, no judgment, but it's throwing off my whole mental threat assessment process." She stared at him like he'd started speaking in quantum mathematics. "You are making jokes now." "Nervous habit," David admitted, then added because apparently his self-preservation instinct had completely shut down. "My squad says I'd crack wise at my own funeral." Assuming I get a funeral, and not just a lost in action notation in someone's database. The corner of her mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, more like her face couldn't quite process what it was supposed to do with the absurdity of the situation. "You are very strange, for a human soldier." "I get that a lot." David let himself slide down the wall opposite her, settling into a sitting position that was probably tactically idiotic but felt necessary somehow. He kept the rifle across his lap, a compromise between protocol and whatever instinct was currently overriding his common sense. So, the Phantom of Arcturus, having a moment in an abandoned observation deck. You want to talk about it? Or should I just sit here and pretend I'm not having the weirdest day of my entire military career? Sierra's ears lifted slightly from her skull, rotating toward him in what he guessed might be curiosity. You are not calling for reinforcements. Not yet. You are not attempting to capture or kill me. Also not yet. Why? David considered the question, watching dust particles drift through his helmet lamp's beam like tiny stars. Honestly, I'm not sure. Maybe because the intelligence reports never mention that the galaxy's most terrifying warrior cries makes you seem. He searched for the word human. Well, you know what I mean. I am Calithian. Yeah, but you're sitting there looking like my sister did when her cat died. Universal language of sadness, I guess. He paused. Do Calithians have cats? Actually, don't answer that. I'm pretty sure there's still 15 classified intelligence gaps about your species, and I don't want to accidentally commit treason by asking about domestic animals. This time she definitely almost smiled. The expression looked strange on a face he'd only ever seen in combat footage, usually right before something exploded. We have creatures similar to what you call cats. Smaller ears, though. Everything has smaller ears compared to you guys. The words were out before he could stop them, and he immediately winced. Sorry, that sounded less offensive in my head. But Sierra had turned fully toward him now, and her ears were standing upright, the tips tilting forward in what his xenobiology training suggested might be amusement. You apologize for mentioning my ears, but not for calling me terrifying. Well, you are terrifying. That's just factually accurate. The ears thing felt personal. She made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely, broken and wet and wholly unexpected. Factually accurate. Yes, the Phantom, the unstoppable. Her voice cracked, the perfect weapon. The pain in those last words made something in David's chest constrict. He'd heard that tone before, in the voices of soldiers who'd seen too much, done too much, been ground down by a war machine that didn't care about the people it consumed. Hey, whatever happened? My mother's blade, she cut him off, gesturing to the shattered weapon beside her. 6 generations of Voltani's warriors carried it. My grandmother took it into the siege of Kepler 62. My mother wielded it at the Treaty of Titans before the treaty failed. And her hand trembled, I broke it, not in battle, in rage. David looked at the fragments of the energy blade, its crystalline core split down the middle, the kind of damage that would take deliberate force. You didn't accidentally break something like that. Rage at what? Sierra's ears flattened again, and when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Do you know what I did 3 days ago, Lieutenant David Torres? His blood went cold at her use of his name. His HUD must have transmitted it somehow, or she'd pulled it from his armor's IFF transponder. How did you? Your identification, broadcasts on standard Terran military frequencies. Not very stealthy. She looked back at the nebula, at the stars beyond. 3 days ago, I provided targeting coordinates for what I was told was a military transport, a high-value target carrying weapons and tactical personnel. I confirmed the vessel's identity. I verified the intelligence. I watched from my fighter as our missiles struck true. David waited, his throat tight, knowing already that he didn't want to hear what came next. It was a civilian evacuation ship. Her voice had gone flat, mechanical, the way people sounded when they were trying not to feel what they were saying. 3,000 Calithian colonists, families fleeing a contested world. Mostly children and elderly. My people, killed because I provided the coordinates, because I believed the intelligence I was given, because I am the Phantom and the Phantom does not question orders. The silence that followed her words felt heavy enough to have its own gravity. David sat frozen, his mind trying to process what she just told him, trying to reconcile the warrior from the briefings with the broken woman sitting 10 feet away. The nebula outside continued its slow cosmic dance, indifferent to the weight of human or Calithian suffering. Jesus, he finally managed, the word slipping out before he could stop it. Sira's ears rotated toward him, confusion crossing her features. Is that a human deity? I have heard the name used in many contexts. Curse, prayer, exclamation. Your language is very inefficient. Despite everything, David felt a laugh bubble up in his chest, slightly hysterical. Yeah, we're not great at clarity. Jesus, God, various other religious figures. We just throw them around when we don't know what else to say. Which is pretty much constantly. That seems psychologically exhausting. You have no idea. He shifted against the wall, his armor creaking. We also say bless you when people sneeze, break a leg when we wish them luck, and we call it head over heels when we fall in love, even though our heads are literally always over our heels unless we're doing handstands. Sira blinked at him, her elongated ears tilting in what he was starting to recognize as her processing information position. Why would you wish someone to break their leg? Theater superstition. Saying good luck is supposedly bad luck, so we tell people to break a leg instead. Which, when you think about it, is objectively worse than bad luck, but humans stopped making sense around the time we invented reality television. Reality television. Don't ask. Trust me, that's a rabbit hole neither of us want to go down. David paused. Actually, explaining what a rabbit hole is would probably take another 10 minutes, so let's just skip that too. For a moment, something almost like amusement flickered across Sira's face. You are attempting to distract me with your nonsensical human idioms. Is it working? She considered this, her head tilting in a way that was oddly bird-like. Perhaps, though I am uncertain whether I feel better or simply more confused about your species. Most humans feel that way about humans, so you're in good company. David looked down at his gloved hands, at the rifle across his lap, at everything except her face. For what it's worth, I know what it feels like. To be lied to find out the mission you executed perfectly was built on shit intelligence and half-truths. Her ears pricked forward, interested despite herself. You have experienced this. My first real combat drop. I was 22, fresh out of advanced training, completely convinced I was one of the good guys. The memory tasted bitter even now. They told us we were liberating a mining colony from Calithian occupation. Hostile forces, civilian population in danger, the whole heroic rescue scenario. We dropped hard and fast, weapons hot, ready to save the day. But it was not an occupation, Sira said quietly. No, it was a mixed settlement. Humans and Calithians who'd been living together peacefully for 15 years. The hostile forces were a civilian militia trying to stay neutral in a war that kept creeping into their territory. We came in like vengeful gods and people ran from us. Families, children. They ran from us because to them, we were the invaders. David's throat felt tight. I didn't shoot anyone, got lucky that way. But I watched it happen. Watched good soldiers following bad orders because we couldn't have known that we were the villains in someone else's story. Sira had turned fully toward him now, her tear-stained face reflecting the red emergency lights. How do you continue, after learning this? Honestly, I'm still figuring that out. He met her eyes, those strange amber-colored eyes that every intelligence brief warned were probably enhanced with combat augmentations, but right now just looked tired. Some days I tell myself that knowing the truth makes me better, more careful. Other days I just feel complicit. Like every mission after that one carries the weight of, what if I'm wrong again? Yes, she breathed the word like a prayer. Exactly that. They sat in silence for a moment, two soldiers from opposite sides of a war, connected by the universal experience of being betrayed by the causes they'd sworn to serve. Outside, a piece of debris, probably a destroyed fighter from the earlier skirmish, drifted past the observation windows, tumbling slowly in the zero-gravity ballet of space junk. Your blade, David said eventually, nodding toward the shattered weapon. I'm guessing that's not standard protocol for dealing with emotional trauma in the Calithian military. Sira's ears flattened slightly. No, that was. She paused, searching for words. Not my finest tactical decision. In my culture, to break an ancestral weapon is to break faith with your lineage, to declare yourself unworthy of the name you carry. That's heavy. The blade or the cultural significance? Both, but I meant the significance. David ran a hand over his helmet, a useless gesture given the sealed suit, though I'm guessing the blade wasn't exactly light either. Those energy cores look complicated. 7 years of training to properly attune one to your neural patterns. She picked up one of the fragments, turning it over in her gauntleted hand. This crystal was grown over 18 months in the deep caves of Voltani's prime. My mother began the growth cycle before I was born, knowing that one day I would need it, and I shattered it in less than a second. So you're having a bad week, is what I'm hearing. The absurdity of his understatement must have translated across their species barrier, because Sira made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. A bad week. Yes. That is certainly one way to describe discovering you are responsible for 3,000 deaths and destroying your family's legacy in a fit of rage. When you put it that way, my week's been pretty decent. I only lost at poker and accidentally called my commanding officer Mom during a briefing. He paused. Though to be fair, Colonel Richards does have very maternal energy when she's threatening to reassign people to waste reclamation duty. Waste reclamation. Exactly what it sounds like. Someone has to manage the toilets on a space station. David grinned behind his helmet. Turns out calling your co-mom is a great way to volunteer for that assignment. Sira's ears had lifted again, and despite the tear tracks still visible on her face, there was something almost like curiosity in her expression. Your military threatens you with sanitation duty. Oh yeah. Nothing motivates quite like the prospect of spending 6 months intimate with the station's plumbing systems. David's comm unit crackled to life, making them both jump. Sarah Kim's voice cut through the static, professional but edged with concern. Tors, you've been dark for 30 minutes. Status report. His hand moved to the transmit button on instinct, then froze. Sira watched him, her amber eyes locked on his hand, her whole body tense like a coiled spring. This was the moment, the decision point. Everything that came after would branch from whatever he said in the next 5 seconds. Tors, respond. We're starting a sweep pattern in your sector. David pressed the button. Sorry, Kim, found a computer core that was still active. Took longer than expected to extract the data. The lie came easier than it should have. Moving to Section 7 now. Copy that. You've got maybe 10 minutes before we need to extract. Calithian patrol vectors show possible return activity. Understood. Tors out. The silence after he released the button felt different than before. Heavier. Sira had stood during the exchange, and now the legendary warrior he'd read about in briefings was back, spine straight, shoulders squared. Only her ears betrayed her, still tilted toward him, and what he'd learned was uncertainty. Why did you lie for me? Her voice had changed too, harder edged, the trained soldier reasserting control over the broken woman from moments ago. David stood as well, his mag boots clunking against the deck. Because 10 minutes ago you told me about the worst thing you've ever done, and you're still here instead of. He gestured vaguely at the stars beyond the glass, floating out there somewhere. That takes something. I don't know what to call it, but it's something. Cowardice, she said flatly. I should have. Don't. The word came out sharper than he intended. Don't finish that sentence. I've lost too many friends to that kind of thinking. Her ears flattened. You do not understand Calithian honor codes. No, but I understand survivor's guilt in about 15 languages, and it sounds the same in all of them. David checked his chronometer. Look, we can have a philosophical debate about honor and duty and whatever else. Or we can focus on the fact that in about 9 minutes this ship is going to be crawling with my squad mates, and some of them are much better shots than I am. But you should call them, tell them the Phantom is here. Sierra's hand moved to her hip where a sidearm rested in its holster. She didn't draw it, just rested her palm against it. You would be celebrated, possibly promoted. The soldier who captured. The soldier who kicked someone when they were down. David shook his head. Yeah, that'll look great on my service record. Real heroic stuff. This is not a game, Lieutenant Torres. I have killed hundreds of your people. And you'll probably kill hundreds more if this war keeps going, unless someone kills you first, which is how wars work and why they're generally terrible. He was pacing now, nervous energy needing an outlet. But right now, in this moment, you're not killing anyone. You're having what my grandmother would call a crisis of faith. And I'm apparently the galaxy's worst soldier because I can't just shoot someone for having feelings. Your grandmother sounds very wise. She also once told me that stubbornness runs in our family like a genetic disorder, so take her wisdom with a grain of salt. David stopped pacing, looked directly at Sierra. Section 7 has functional escape pods. I checked the manifest when I was reviewing the ship layout. Old colony-class vessels, pre-programmed with random trajectory vectors to avoid pirates. If you launched from there, you'd be nearly impossible to track. Sierra's ears shot straight up, her eyes widening. You are helping me escape. I'm telling you factual information about ship systems. What you do with that information is your business. He glanced at his chronometer again. 8 minutes. This will destroy your career. Probably. They may charge you with treason. Possibly. Why? The word came out almost anguished. Why would you risk this for me? David thought about it, really thought about it. About the woman crying in starlight. About the shattered blade and broken pride. About 3,000 lives lost to bad intelligence and the weight of that knowledge in her voice. Because you broke your mother's sword rather than keep being the person they wanted you to be. That took more courage than anything I've done in this whole damn war. For a moment, Sierra just stared at him. Then she moved, fast enough that his hand twitched toward his rifle before he caught himself. But she wasn't attacking. She was gathering the fragments of her blade, carefully collecting each piece and securing them in a pouch on her belt. Section 7, she said, we should move quickly. Right, yeah, great. David activated his HUD ship layout. Follow me and try to look captured if we run into anyone. Look captured. Hands up, defeated expression, the usual. He started toward the door, then paused. Actually, can you do a defeated expression? All the intel photos show you looking like you want to murder everything in a 3-parsec radius. Her ears tilted back in what he was pretty sure was indignation. I can look defeated. Prove it. Sierra's face shifted, her ears drooping, her shoulders slumping, her eyes going wide and helpless. She looked like a lost child in ceremonial armor. It was so dramatically pathetic that David couldn't help but laugh. Okay, that's actually worse. You look like you're auditioning for a tragedy play. Just walk behind me, and if we see anyone, I'll do the talking. They moved through the darkened corridors, David leading with his rifle up, Sierra following 3 paces behind. The ship groaned around them, metal contracting in the cold of space, sounds that made David's nerves sing with tension. Every shadow could be a squad member. Every reflection in a viewport could be someone about to call in their position. Your friend, Sierra said quietly as they navigated around a collapsed bulkhead. The one on the communication device. She will know you lied. Sarah, yeah, probably. She's known me since basic training. Can read my tells like a holobook. She will report you. Maybe. Or maybe she'll decide she didn't hear anything suspicious and was too focused on the patrol vectors to notice any irregularities in my comm discipline. David ducked under a bundle of exposed wiring. Sarah's good people. She understands that sometimes the rules don't cover all the situations you actually encounter in the field. You have much faith in your friend. She once covered for me when I accidentally erased 3 weeks of reconnaissance data because I thought I was playing a simulation exercise. David grinned at the memory. Told our co it was a system glitch. I owe her probably a dozen favors at this point. This seems like a very large favor to add to that debt. Yeah, well, interest rates are high in the friendship economy. Section 7 appeared through the darkness like a promise, its entrance marked by flickering emergency strips that cast everything in alternating shadow and blood-red light. David's chronometer showed 4 minutes remaining, and he could hear the distant clank of mag boots on hull plating, his squad, getting closer with each sweep pattern. The escape pod bay was smaller than he'd expected, just 6 vessels lined up like coffins against the outer wall. Their hatches showed green ready lights, pre-flight systems still active despite weeks of abandonment. Pre-war engineering built to last through anything. They still have power, Sierra said, moving to the nearest pod and running her hand along its hull. Colony class, like you said. These will reach inhabited space within 6 days if the vectors are favorable. David pulled up the launch controls on the bay's main terminal, his fingers moving through the authorization bypass protocols he'd learned in advanced systems training. Random trajectory generation was standard on these models. Pirates couldn't predict where the pods would go, couldn't chase them all down. Efficient. Sierra was studying the pod's interior now, her ears rotating as she assessed the cramped space. Designed for humans, though. I will have to adjust the seat configuration for my height. Yeah, you Calithians got the long and elegant genes. We got the short and stocky ones. David keyed in the final bypass code and the terminal lit up green. We're good to go. Just need to program the launch sequence in. Tours? Sarah Kim's voice crackled through his comm, closer now, maybe 2 corridors away. We're entering Section 7. You should be right on top of us. His heart kicked into overdrive. Sierra's hand had moved to her sidearm again, her whole body tensing for combat. David held up a hand, mouthing the word wait, then pressed his transmit button. Copy that, Kim. I'm in the pod bay. Found some interesting damage patterns I'm documenting. He paused, then added, looks like something big came through here. Plasma scoring on the bulkheads, recent too. Recent? How recent? Sarah's voice had shifted to combat alert. Hours maybe, could be nothing, could be a patrol checking for salvage. David watched Sierra climb into the pod, her movements fluid despite the cramped space. I'm just about done here. Meet you at the extraction point in 3. A pause on the other end, long enough that David's pulse hammered in his ears. Then copy, be careful, Tours. Something feels off about this sweep. Understood, Tours out. He killed the connection and immediately started programming the launch sequence, his hands moving faster than his brain could keep up. The pod's hatch was still open, Sierra watching him from inside with an expression he couldn't quite read. Your friend suspects something, she said. Sarah suspects everything. It's what makes her a good soldier. David finished the sequence, then pulled something from his belt pouch, a standard-issue emergency beacon. He pressed it into Sierra's hand. This is keyed to neutral frequencies. If you get into trouble, if the pod malfunctions, activate it. Someone will pick up the signal. Someone human or someone Calithian. Does it matter? Sierra looked at the beacon, then at him. You are very strange, David Tours. Second time you've said that. I'm starting to think it might be true. He checked his chronometer. 2 minutes. Listen, I don't know what happens after this. Maybe the war ends tomorrow, maybe it goes on for another decade. Maybe we run into each other again under different circumstances, or maybe this is it. But I need you to know, what you told me about the transport, about those 3,000 people, that wasn't on you. Not really. War is a machine that chews people up and spits out killers, and sometimes the people running the machine lie about what they're feeding into it. Her ears lifted, tilting forward in full attention. Your words sound like experience. Yeah, well, I've had some time to think about that mining colony. David's throat felt tight. The choice you have now is whether you let it define you or whether you use it to become something else. Someone who questions the orders, who demands better intelligence, who remembers those faces enough to prevent it from happening again. You believe I can do this? After everything, I watched the galaxy's most feared warrior choose to break her sword instead of keep being a perfect weapon. That's not weakness, Sira. That's evolution. He moved to close the pod's hatch, then stopped. Hey, do Calithians have any weird cultural taboos about physical contact? Because humans do this thing where we shake hands or sometimes hug when we're saying goodbye, and I don't want to accidentally insult your ancestors or whatever. But despite everything, she almost smiled. We do not shake hands, we. She paused, then reached up and removed one of the ceremonial cuffs from her ear, the metal gleaming in the emergency lighting. We exchanged tokens of honor debt, a promise that cannot be forgotten. She pressed the ear cuff into his palm, her fingers lingering for a moment. The metal was warm from her body heat, etched with symbols he couldn't read, but that felt weighted with centuries of meaning. Sira, I can't take this. This is a promise, she interrupted firmly. When this war ends, David Tors, I will find you, not as enemies. Her ears tilted in what he'd learned was her version of a smile. As friends. Is that the correct human term? Yeah, his voice came out rougher than intended. Friends. He closed the hatch before he could second-guess himself, sealed it, and initiated the launch sequence. The pod's engines hummed to life, warming up for the explosive decompression that would fling it into the void. Through the small viewport, he could see Sira adjusting her harness, her elongated ears pressed flat against her skull in preparation for high-G acceleration. The bay door opened with a groan of protesting metal. Stars flooded the space beyond, the nebula painting everything in shades of crimson and gold. David stepped back to the safety line as the pod's engines roared to full power. Sarah Kim's voice crackled through his comm. Tors, what the hell was that noise? Bay door malfunction, he said, watching the pod launch into the black, watching it become just another point of light among infinite others. One of the old mechanisms finally gave out. I'm clear of it. We're coming to you, stay put. Copy that. David stood alone in the bay, watching the space where the pod had been, his hand unconsciously closing around the ear cuff in his glove. Behind him, he heard mag boots approaching, heard Sarah's voice calling his name, heard the war machine grinding forward to its next engagement. But for just a moment, standing in that cathedral of stars with the nebula painting shadows across the deck, David Tors felt like he'd finally done something in this war that mattered. Not capturing an enemy, not following orders, but choosing in one critical moment to see a person instead of a target. The ear cuff pressed against his palm, warm and solid and impossibly heavy, with the weight of a promise that might never be kept but felt true nonetheless. Somewhere out there, racing toward the dark between stars, Sira Voltanis was making the same choice. To survive, to change, to become something more than what this war had tried to make her. Whether that promise would ever come due, whether they'd meet again when the shooting finally stopped, David didn't know. But he'd learned something his grandmother had tried to teach him years ago. That sometimes the most human thing you could do was choose compassion over duty, connection over protocol, the person in front of you over the war grinding on around you. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her rifle up, scanning for threats. Tors, you good? He turned to face her, slipping the ear cuff deeper into his glove where it wouldn't be visible. Yeah, just taking in the view, hell of a nebula out here. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face behind his helmet's visor. Then she lowered her rifle and jerked her head toward the exit. Come on, let's go home. As they moved through the darkened corridors back toward their extraction point, David glanced once more through a viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, a pod was racing toward safety. Somewhere out there, a promise waited to be kept. And for the first time since that mining colony 3 years ago, David felt like maybe he'd gotten something right.